Hello, I am your everyday average Jonathan. Join me this week as I turn this and this into this, a sword that is a cross between a saber, a scimitar, and a katana. Hello, I am your everyday average Jonathan. I'm an ordinary guy with ordinary tools making extraordinary items. I'm a self-taught craftsman. I'm an amateur blacksmith and a novice woodworker. I have no professional training and your basic assortment of tools that I've cobbled together over the years. Each week I take on a new project. I show you my process, I show you my perspective. I don't edit out any of my mistakes. I don't edit out any of my aha moments. My aim in these videos is to demonstrate that anybody, no matter how skilled or unskilled, self-taught or professionally taught, can take on projects that you may have thought were out of reach or outlandish or just plain too difficult. When we choose to dive right into things and attempt new builds and go outside of our comfort zone, we often experience things that are only experienced through hard-won knowledge, through lots of mistakes, lots of elbow grease. I certainly do. The projects that I make each week tend to be whimsical in nature, fantastical, sometimes practical, sometimes yielding things that I'll actually use, but most of the time just for the purpose of recreation and for the fun of it. Items like weapons and armor, structures, furniture, novelty items. This week I will be taking on a new project build. It's something that has been on my mind for a very long time. And honestly, I would have built it sooner, but I try not to make too many projects that are back-to-back weapons builds and put those up on my channel. I don't really want to be pigeonholed into one type of building. A few weeks ago, a good friend of mine came to visit me and asked me to build him a great sword, which I did. I'm thrilled with how it turned out. But this particular sword that I'm gonna build this week is a cross between a saber, a scimitar, and maybe a katana. It's going to have what I would call an elvish look and maybe even an orcish look of sorts. It marks the first time that I've ever went out and bought really high-end, high-carbon steel in a big sheet, and I'm gonna cut this out of it, but at the same time, I'm going to do a little bit of forging on it. So we're at the shop. Without further ado, let's get started. So I think I was incorrect when I called what I am making a saber. It is going to be a cross between several things with probably elven, maybe even orcish aesthetics, but it is not going to be a saber. It's going to be something that's closer to what's called a falchion. Like a saber, a falchion has a slight reverse curve to it, and it's going to be a single-edged sword. It was found between the 13th and 16th centuries in Europe most often. Unlike a saber that was often used in cavalry, a falchion was used more for dueling, more for one-on-one fighting. It has an ancestor, what's called the seax, as well as a few other items that we've seen historically. Interesting to note that, like many things with medieval weaponry and heraldry, the falchion was later a status symbol, and it was often presented to the new bishop of a land or a fiefdom, especially in England at the time. Interestingly also is that what is considered the Vorpal blade, Lewis Carroll, who wrote the Alice in Wonderland stories, he also wrote a nonsensical poem called The Jabberwocky, in which the hero wields something called the Vorpal blade to destroy the beast, the Jabberwocky. And it is noted by historians that the Vorpal blade was most likely patterned off of a falchion. So I made a lot of sketches of this particular style that I saw in my mind's eye. I could see it pretty clearly most of the time, but I was having a real hard time capturing it when I put pen to paper. I did end up ordering a big sheet of 1075 steel. That's high carbon steel. It's good blade steel. I ordered it from the New Jersey Steel Baron, which just is an exotic, cool sounding name to me. I spent a lot of time laying this out. I actually used both sides because I wasn't certain of which profile I liked the most. And then just a lot of cutting. This on paper was supposed to be 1/4 inch thick steel. It seemed like it was 3/8 inch. It just felt so heavy and so chunky. And even my friends who we're about to meet here, they would agree with that. So to help with the hammering and the profiling of this, I needed to elicit some help. Meet my friends Greg and Dave. Two absolute studs, always willing to come up, hammer on things. They know their way around a shop full of tools. Here's Dave profiling my blade for me, while Greg, who actually does armored combat, was profiling and texturing one of his blades. Now comes the time where we're going to practice a Japanese skill, which is, I'm just going to call it co-hammering because I have no idea what I'm actually talking about. And here I'm giving directions as if I actually know again what I'm sort of talking about. These guys got ready, I bring out the blade, and what we're doing here, I just want to texture this thing. I want the entire blade to have a very hammered look. I like that look a lot, and to do that, there was just going to be lots of hammer blows and a little bit of tunes. And then more hammer blows. We used all sorts of different shapes and sizes of hammer to give it as much of a, I would call it, random, earthen, maybe even dwarven. The profile of this blade has both, to me, an elvish look, but also a slight orcish look. Both Dave and Greg agreed to that. And again, we used all different sorts of hammers and heated this up many times. I'm going to heat treat this and quench it later. But my friends, Greg and Dave, they could give me a couple hours of their time and off they went. They had to head back down the mountain, get back into town. Here's what it looks like so far. And now comes the time where I'm going to make the handle, instead of making it straight, I thought about making the handle very straight. I'm going to give it a slight curve. And that little red blade you see there, that's just a standard cutoff wheel that comes from Home Depot that isn't the carbon style. It just sucks. I'm not going to spend any more time on those wheels. Although, anytime I get to use this giant grinder that someone just gave me, my life is always better for it. So I cut the handle pieces, gave them a slight angle so that there's just a slight curve to it. And then I'll just tack weld these together, weld them fully, and Bob's your uncle. I haven't even gotten to the honing portion of this build yet, but just the profiling alone probably took me 3 to 4 hours. There's just lots and lots of little indentations, little protrusions that I see on it, but I got it really close. I like it. Once I get to honing, that's going to be many more hours, I'm sure of it.
And even though I do plan to quench this and heat treat it, for the honing process that I'm about to do, I did plan to quench it in water along the way. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to hand draw a median line down the blade so that when I'm grinding it from one side, I can see when I'm getting pretty close to that median line. I will not regale you with the 2 hours of honing that it took and so many pieces of sandpaper, but a lot of hand work, a lot of grinder work, and I like the way it looks so far. Now it's time to put on my artist touch mark. I'm just going to spot heat this at this time because we're going to heat treat this directly after. All right, into the forge. Since my forge is probably only 18 inches, it's going to be an interesting process to go back and forth and try to get this heated. It did warp several times while in the forge, but finally, this is what it looks like at Jonathan's shop when I heat treat something that is decently long. Thankfully, nothing warped. It looks really, really good. And I did a file test on it, and it is definitely hardened really well. So now, the only thing that I have to do is start to clean this up, hit it with another grinding wheel, go back over the already honed edge with a finer file, a finer piece of sandpaper, and get it really sharp. This is, again, as I often say, this is tool sharp. I did not go for something that I was going to be razor sharp at all. I'm creating what are going to be the scales or the form of the handle right now.
Come up the next day, and now it's time to make the pommel and the guard. These are going to be out of cast bronze. I have my own recipe for bronze. If you ask me what the recipe is, I'm just going to say meh stuff. But I'm going to cut out the forms first and get them all set up, beveled, and profiled before I start to create the mixture of bronze and put it in the casting clay. Anytime I get a chance to cast something, I try to use my forge because it just melts things so much faster than the kiln that I have. But there will be a time that I do have to use the kiln in this. So first things first, this is going to be the design of the pommel. And that, I think I will get enough out of that, out of the forge. I'm trying to use a bit more flux and also do a better job of removing the slag, but I didn't do a good job on this one, and it will come to see a little bit later that this just it wasn't a thick enough pommel. It just turned out to be extremely thin when I got to it. Now I'm going to make the guard. I went back and forth on this guard. I'm not really pleased with the overall design, but for some reason I just couldn't come up with something better. I really struggled a lot with this guard. Same thing, cut the form out of wood and then give it a little bit more of a three-dimensional shape. Put just as much brass and copper and a little bit of lead in there as I could, and I still ended up needing more. It's very fascinating how quickly that breaks down inside the kiln. And as I mentioned here, you're going to see that when I pull this out, it's just way too thin. That is not a pommel for the sword I'm making, so I'm going to end up casting a new one, getting it a lot thicker. Now this is the guard. I would have probably cast this in a different orientation, but it is what it is. Just took a lot more work for me to get it to the profile that I wanted it to be. As I've said many times before, I love casting things out of bronze. I just think it's the coolest process ever. Yeah, you can see that's a guard for a exotic sword, right? Yeah, look at that thing. It looks just like a guard. No, it doesn't. So I'm using this new cup wheel to abrade and to grind things. I actually don't know what a cup wheel is for, so I probably got it wrong. I just went back to the grinding stone after this. This thing's been profiled completely. Now all I need to do is get it set up so that it can slide over the handle. And now I'm going to glue all of the pieces together. The wooden pieces, I didn't show the process of making those ringlets that you see there, but that was just another group of casted items. I'm going to tack weld on this little bolt, and you can see this is one of your first indications you're working with a real genius, when you're holding it with your bare hand over something that's going to be really, really hot. And lo and behold, it gets a little hot, I suppose. But, you know, another indication of a sheer genius is they can be taught. Well, apparently this genius cannot be taught, because here I am again doing the same thing. That said, it worked. It worked. I did have to straighten it a little bit, but it worked perfectly for what I needed it to be. Looks good so far. All I have to do now is to drill and tap the pommel. So I'm going to go ahead and put a 1/4 inch tap into this pommel that I'm making. I'm using that glove there so that the vise doesn't mar up the bronze, which I've learned the hard way multiple times. But this fits like a glove. It looks great. I like how it faded up there. I was using a steel washer between the wooden handle and the last piece. Now all we got to do is stay in the handle. I'm getting my daughter here. She's staring at the camera an awful lot there, isn't she? But she's going to be the one that puts on the stain for me. And if I'm going to be honest, she was crap at it. It got stuff everywhere, as you can see, kept touching the metal. I had to take it from her and show her how the big boys do it. No, she was awesome. She was a great help. And here it is. I do like how this turned out largely. There are some things that I would do differently, or some things that I didn't do correctly, we should say. But by and large, this came out pretty darn well.
Thank you for joining me for this build. I like the way this sword came out. It is not quite what I had in my mind's eye, and there's a couple issues or mistakes I made that we'll get to. But by and large, it's a cool looking sword. Okay, straight in. I had initially thought I was going to do something that was going to be more of a blend between a saber and a katana and maybe a scimitar. And really, once I got going, I realized that this is actually more of a falchion and even maybe a cutlass. And you all know a cutlass. It's one of those iconic swords that you see pirates wielding.
You'll have to forgive me. I have to move back inside the shop because there's a storm coming in and the wind is just so loud outside. Okay, what I was saying is this does have sort of the shape and the guard, especially in the handle, of what might be a cutlass. The blade is definitely more of a falchion with this piece here that I just added on for accent. Things that I got wrong, things that I made mistakes on. This hammered look, while I enjoy it, did not come out right. The hammer blows are way too deep in it. They're too pronounced. And what they should be is much more closely spaced together, less pronounced, less deep, but just blanketing the entire thing, an entire texture of hammer blows. Right now it's hammer blow, flat metal, hammer blow, flat metal, hammer blow, flat metal. It's not what I was looking for, but when we were doing it out of the forge, it was hard to tell. It looked like the whole thing was nothing but hammer blows. If you've watched my channel, you'll notice that this is a very common effect that I go for with my weapons. All right, number two, the sword is not stupid sharp. I tend to not get my sword stupid sharp. It's tool sharp or axe sharp potentially. I can get it sharper if I want to, but this is probably going to be handled by people. People are going to pick it up as an accent piece and want to put their hands on it, which I want them to. Okay, third thing, and I'm going to use my gauntlet here to demonstrate. I enjoy this look. I enjoy this cutout that I did here. I like the way that looked, and I was planning on doing another one to mirror it on the other side. Once I got that in there, I thought, Well, that's interesting. What if we just left it sort of a scoop on one side, which if you look at late broadswords, especially Scottish broadswords, and then into rapiers, they had a lot of eccentric or non-symmetrical guards to them. Certain guards were made to guard the fingers, other guards were made to wrap over the fist, so they weren't even on one side. So I kind of wanted to give it that sort of look. And my thought was this: when you put on a gauntlet, the metal portion of the gauntlet up by the knuckles is going to be protected already, so that this cutout here would be perfect for that. Well, once I look at it, it's not. There's a big gap right there where the leather, where a blade or a weapon can get in. So now that is no longer a protected area for this hand. Whereas the fingers, which are already armored, they're completely protected and they look just fine. So that did not turn out the way I had planned it for it. I could go through and then mirror this just to make it look symmetrical. I'm not going to. I think the accent piece is worthy of a conversation. Final piece for me on this that was an issue. I still need to talk to my friend Jacob to get more advice on how to make bronze, brass, where there's not all sorts of little fissures and little occlusions and indentations and problems within it that make it just look shoddy to me. Again, my aesthetic is I like things that look used, that look battle worn, that look raw, and that look aged. I like that. So things like this, where you can see these indentations here, I could correct that. I could recast it, I could put some spray paint on that. I'm not going to. It has personality, it has character, but it is a mistake. So overall, I'm pleased with this blade. I give it the grade of maybe a B-. Okay, next week I'm gonna begin a stack of commissions that I've just been waiting to do. I have 3 commissions that are waiting for me, and I'm gonna start them next week. The first of which is just going to be a hunting knife that has a bone or an antler handle. It's gonna be very simple, but it's kind of a cute story, which we'll get to in that build as to how it came to me. If you like projects like this sword, please check out my channel for other builds that I've done where I make weapons and armor, some practical items, a lot of novelties, and a lot of fantastical things like this. Until then, thank you for joining me. God bless.